I'm Tara Mergener. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, the search for peace. Steve Witkoff meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin as the war in Ukraine rages on. Somber anniversary, 80 years after the bombing of Hiroshima. We hear from the president of the USCCB on the response from the faithful. Disturbing events. A Catholic student is dismissed from a medical program in Massachusetts. Why, she says it's because of her pro-life views. Plus, staying prepared. Pope Leo says God's love is not by chance, but a choice. We will explain. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
And thank you for being with us on the Feast of the Transfiguration. Our top story tonight, President Donald Trump calls it a highly productive meeting. He's referring to talks his special envoy Steve Witkoff just had with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Their meeting today comes ahead of a Friday White House deadline for Russia to reach a peace deal with Ukraine or face economic consequences. In addition, tonight, published reports say President Trump may soon meet with Putin. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Good evening, Tara. Regarding that Steve Witkoff-Vladimir Putin meeting that lasted some 3 hours, President Trump also posted on Truth Social, quote, "Great progress was made."
In southeast Ukraine today, Zaporizhia, a deadly attack. Russia striking a recreational center. Cars and buildings damaged. Firefighters dousing the smoldering wreckage. And as the war drags on, in Moscow, Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin greet each other with a handshake. A White House official saying the Russians want to continue speaking with the United States.
What are your expectations today?
For Witkoff, his fifth visit to Russia since the start of the year. In June, President Trump gave Russia a 50-day window to reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. Later, reduced to 10 days. The president also posting on Truth Social today. Afterwards, I updated some of our European allies. Everyone agrees this war must come to a close, and we will work towards that in the days and weeks to come. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posting that he spoke with President Trump after the Witkoff meeting, adding, "Our joint position with our partners is absolutely clear. The war must end, and it must be done honestly." European leaders were on the call, and I'm grateful to each of them for their support. We discussed what was spelled out in Moscow. Ukraine will definitely defend its independence. Before today's meeting, President Trump has expressed increasing frustration with Putin over Russia's escalating strikes on civilian areas of Ukraine, lamenting the loss of life on both sides, calling the war ridiculous. Just yesterday, the president was asked about tariffs as punishment.
Do you still plan to follow through on your threat to impose 100% tariffs on all countries that purchase Russian energy, including China?
Well, I never said a percentage, but we'll be doing quite a bit of that. We'll see what happens over the next fairly short period of time, but we'll see what happens. Yep.
And today, President Trump ordering an additional 25% tariff on India for its purchases of Russian oil. That brings the combined tariffs imposed by the United States on its ally to 50%.
As President Trump seeks to broker an end to the fighting in Ukraine and his positive assessment of today's meeting, right now there are no guarantees of peace anytime soon between Russia and Ukraine. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Owen, thank you. Well, tomorrow, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plans to convene his security cabinet to discuss expanding Israel's military campaign in Gaza. This comes as negotiations with Hamas for a ceasefire and hostage release have reached an impasse. The proposal is to move into the heart of Gaza City and the central areas of the territory where it is believed the hostages are being held. However, the plan faces criticism not only from the international community, but also from Israelis themselves. Amid the discussions in Israel, local officials in Gaza say at least 38 people were killed while seeking aid from United Nations convoys and sites run by an Israeli-backed American contractor. Local hospitals say another 25 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes. For more, let's bring in Ambassador James Jeffrey. He is the former special representative for Syria and ISIS. Let's begin with the Israeli Prime Minister, James. Despite the growing criticism domestically and internationally, he plans to convene his security cabinet tomorrow to discuss expanding Israel's military campaign into the rest of Gaza. What kind of impact will a possible expansion have, do you think?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it will cause considerable tension with Europeans, with Arab states, and around the world, and increasingly isolate Israel. The main problem will be with the U.S. because people in the United States, including the Trump administration, want to know how does this all end and what is the plan to finalize the war in Gaza and get beyond it. Get the hostages back, get Hamas out of its position of control, and find some kind of peace. That's the key question. We'll have to see how Netanyahu answers it.
Yeah, a lot of people certainly want a lot of information about that and when this is all going to end. The UN Assistant Secretary General briefed a Security Council meeting called by Israel, and it comes after pictures of 2 emaciated hostages were released. The UN concluded the only way to end the crisis is for the hostages to be released and for humanitarian aid to be allowed in. So this seems very similar to what other leaders have said. Is this any different? And does the UN carry some weight in the situation?
The UN carries little weight because it is so one-sided and has been one-sided against Israel for decades. The problem is there aren't 2 conditions, there are 3. Return of the hostages, humanitarian assistance to the suffering people of Gaza, and thirdly, removal of Hamas from power and elimination of its threat to Israel. That's the whole purpose of the Israeli war.
Also, France is saying that it plans to recognize a Palestinian state along with promises from Britain and Canada to follow suit. So does this give Hamas incentive to raise the diplomatic price for releasing the hostages?
Of course, it is immature, ridiculous, and a good example of why the Europeans are not willing to play a true realpolitik role in this crisis. There are other ways to pressure Israel if you want to pressure Israel, particularly on the humanitarian front. But this is not a way. This is just going to get the Israelis' backs up, and for good reason.
You know, and James, also, I'd like to ask you one more question on the humanitarian aid part of this. How does humanitarian aid get into Gaza? What is the solution, in your opinion?
Well, there are many different solutions. The main thing is Israel and the United States have to cooperate more than they have in the last few weeks with the goal of eliminating this propaganda victory for Hamas. There's been enough, over the last almost 2 years, there's been enough humanitarian aid flowing into Gaza in fits and starts, but nonetheless flowing in to keep the population alive and more or less functioning. The Israelis and the United States can return to that, but we must do so very quickly given the situation.
Such a difficult situation it is. James Jeffrey, thank you for your thoughts on this. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And now to the state of Georgia, where an Army sergeant shot 5 fellow soldiers at a base near Savannah. All 5 were treated on site at Fort Stewart and were later moved to a nearby hospital for further treatment. Their condition is unclear. The shooter is in custody and the incident remains under investigation. It has been 7 months since the beginning of a new Congress, and lawmakers are on their first extended break. Republicans are touting their successes, including passing the big, beautiful bill. Democrats argue that Americans are losing ground under President Trump's policies. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with more. Eric.
Well, great to see you, Terry. Yeah, the key question here is who's going to do a better job of messaging during the August recess, as lawmakers are hoping to get a clearer picture on the election landscape heading into the midterms next November. Republicans have been anxious to get home to sell President Trump's agenda to voters.
I think we stay focused on the accomplishments. The big, beautiful bill delivered for working class folks, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. We front-loaded that money to secure our border. We front-loaded that money for our military to keep people safe.
But recent polling shows generally less than half of Americans approve of the president's economic agenda.
It's no state secret at this point that this economy is not working for working people. And so he can fire as many messengers as he wants, but Donald Trump cannot suppress the truth from the American people, which is that this economy is not good.
The economy's solid. a year or so ago, we had 9% inflation. Now it's down to 2.5% to 3%. Unemployment is fine.
As for the big, beautiful bill,
we have to stop the fear mongering and go out and correct the truth with the other half of the truth. And that's exactly what we're doing. And what we're finding is when people understand it and they understand the truth, they are much more in favor of it.
Meanwhile, Democrats have their own messaging challenges. Many in the party have called for a reset following Republicans winning the White House and Congress last year.
But you got to get out and talk to the labor organization members, many of them who voted for President Trump. How do we engage in those deeper conversations with people who are not in the political world? Because right now, people are feeling a tremendous amount of distrust in government.
And Democrats are confident their kitchen table issue messaging will decide who controls Congress after next year's midterm election.
What's really meaningful to Americans right now is what's happening to their pocketbooks, to their values, to the quality of life around them. And I think those bread and butter, kitchen table issues are what will be important to the American people going forward.
It is interesting to see and hear how both sides each have their own messaging. Well, Congress won't be back until after Labor Day. Their biggest challenge, keeping the government open past September 30th. But to do that, nearly a dozen spending bills still need to be finalized. Whether that can be done on time, we have to wait and see, or we could be headed for another continuing resolution. All this will affect the midterm elections. Tara, back to you.
Eric, never dull moment. Before you go, I understand another Republican senator won't seek re-election next November. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that is correct. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn, who was elected to her third term last November, well, she announced that she is running for governor of Tennessee. She could become the first female governor in the state's history. As governor, she would appoint her temporary successor before a special election could be held to take her Senate seat. Blackburn is the third sitting senator to announce a run for governor this year. As we mentioned, Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville and Colorado Democrat Michael Bennet said that they're running for governor in their respective states. Tara?
All right, Eric, thanks again. Well, we have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly. An unspeakable tragedy. 80 years ago, the U.S. changed the course of history. Archbishop Timothy Broglio explains why lessons from the past are critical to our future. And dismissed from a medical program over religious values. That's what a new lawsuit in Massachusetts alleges. We have the details. A solitary bell rings out in Hiroshima, marking 80 years since the United States dropped the atomic bomb on that Japanese city, hastening the end to World War II. This morning, the country's prime minister and other officials laid flowers at the city's memorial for the victims. Others showed up earlier in the morning to pray and to remember the victims in their own way. Survivors say it's important to remember what happened on August 6, 1945.
In 10 and 20 years, there will be no one left to pass on this sad and painful experience. That's why I want to share as much as I can.
Today, the call to eliminate nuclear weapons still sounds across the globe. In fact, Archbishop Timothy P. Broglio, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, published a message this week calling for the conversion of hearts and nuclear disarmament. And we are happy to welcome Archbishop Broglio on the program today. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. But first, before we talk about your message, we're following news out of Fort Stewart in Georgia right now, where 5 soldiers have been shot. As the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of the Military Services, what have you heard, and how is the Archdiocese responding?
Well, the Archdiocese obviously responds with prayers for the victims and their families, and also prayers in the hopes that they might, that these shootings might not be fatal. I tried to contact the chaplain, the Catholic priest who's at Fort Stewart, but unfortunately I was unable to reach him. Probably because he's involved in some of the first response. So our prayers are certainly with all of the people there, and we hope that there will soon be an end to this kind of ceaseless violence.
Absolutely, such a scary situation. Regarding your message on nuclear disarmament, why did you feel the need to renew the call for nuclear disarmament?
Well, I think it's important that we keep in mind the importance of eliminating this threat, which hangs over the whole world. And I think also we know that the funds that are used to procure and modernize and continue to maintain these arms could be used for so many other things that are very vital to our world today. So I think that remains a constant hope and a constant prayer on the part of all of us.
Absolutely. You also say we must renew our efforts to work toward the conversion of the heart that could bring about lasting peace. How can we help in the conversion of hearts?
But I think one thing that all of us can do, even in our own little worlds in which we live, is to treat others with respect and dignity, and remember always that the other, even if we disagree with him or her, is created in the image and likeness of God. And so that alone means that he or she merits our respect and also our ability to listen to another. I think if we learned anything at the Synod, it was the importance of listening. And that's so, I think that's a feature that's sometimes lacking in our world, perhaps because we always converse with one another with devices instead of perhaps sitting down and just pulling up a chair and listening to the other one. But that I think that would be a very important first step that all of us can make. And then we can also try to convince our leaders to work earnestly for nuclear disarmament and for better understanding among nations. So important in our world today.
Of course. And what role do you see the church playing specifically in the effort to eliminate nuclear weapons?
Well, I think the church can always be an advocate for the elimination of these weapons. I realize that it has to be a multi-partisan. So, you know, we could certainly have advocacy in countries where Christianity has a certain weight, which would cover many of the nuclear powers. But then I think we also have to convince our leaders to be then effective ambassadors of this message to those countries where the church might not have the same weight or the same ability to enter into dialogue. But certainly try to continue to work for this goal.
Of course. And in his message to the Bishop of Hiroshima just yesterday, Pope Leo expressed his respect and affection for the survivors of the bombing. How do you think that message was received by the Catholic faithful in Japan?
Well, I'm sure they were happy that the Holy Father was close to them in this particular anniversary, and that's really all. That's the most that we can do in this kind of a situation is express our remembrance, our prayers, our hopes that as I said in my message, that these kinds of situations that push powers to these drastic decisions that they not be repeated.
Archbishop Broglio, thank you so much for your thoughts today.
You're very, very welcome. Happy to be with you.
All right, well, a lawsuit in Massachusetts says a Catholic student in a medical education program was dismissed from the school after she objected to the part of the program that forced her to watch an abortion. The lawsuit against Springfield College was filed late last month. It alleges that the Catholic student enrolled in Springfield's physician assistant program was scheduled to see a procedure commonly used for late-term abortion. The student says she assumed she was going to witness a miscarriage and was, quote, overwhelmed at seeing that abortion. The student says she complained in an evaluation and was placed on academic probation, and her OB/GYN rotation was listed as incomplete. And for more, we turn to Christy Hamrick, Vice President of Media and Policy for Students for Life Action. Christy, thanks for joining us. We just heard the basic details of this case. What more can you tell us about the Catholic student and her allegations against Springfield College?
Well, what I can say is that it's not an isolated incident. We have a Future Medical Professionals for Life of America chapter at Students for Life. We have attorneys on standby. I know the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs and Gynecologists stands ready to support such students. What would be, don't we wish that this was isolated? And it just isn't. I right now have a daughter and son-in-law in medical school right now, and the pressure to turn a blind eye to abortion, to pretend that it's medical and not moral, there's tremendous academic, I think, lethargy still in terms of abortion, and still pushing toward a pro-abortion direction.
What an incredibly difficult situation. What more do we know about the school's physician assistant program, and was it common for students to witness an abortion? You're saying this is not an isolated incident.
It's not an isolated incident, and I think what's interesting is the way that this student seemed to be, and I'm going from the reports that I've read, seems to have been forced into the dynamic where it is not an abortion when you are not ending a preborn life. The issue isn't whether or not women and men in medical school are learning how to do a D&C to clean out a uterus. The issue is whether or not they're forced to kill children, why they learn it. That's the real core issue here, because the D&C is a procedure. A gun is a device. It's how it's used that matters, you know. So we're looking at something that's how something is employed, how something is executed. So she was told that she was going to see a procedure, assuming it was a miscarriage, and finds out that instead someone's going to die. That's a very different situation. There should be opt-in rules, not opt-out. And the difference in those two things is if you are seeking out an abortion, and God forbid, you should have to look to get that. It shouldn't be that everyone else is co-opted into the business of abortion. And it's I know the APLOG is very direct about the fact that most OB-GYNs don't do abortions. So to pretend now that they all have to be forced into that business is really, I think, just an effective campaign by the abortion lobby.
What are the next steps in the case? We mentioned the lawsuit was filed just last month.
Well, I imagine that the lawyers are gathering evidence. So I'm not involved in that particular case, so I don't want to speak to what they're doing. But having been involved in many similar cases, you're ready to see if the school will perhaps give in, facing lawsuit. Would they prefer to settle rather than go and continue? If not, you're going to go to depositions and gathering of evidence. We've certainly been through that at Students for Life many, many times. But I would encourage everybody to pray for this student. Again, my own daughter and son-in-law are in medical school, and I can't imagine the agony of this student, having devoted years and years of her life to the kind of study that achieves you a position in a prestigious school, and then to lose it because you don't want to do harm to preborn life. That's an extraordinary loss, and my heart as a mother really breaks for her.
Certainly a lot of moving parts here. A lot of eyes are going to be watching this case. Christy Hamrick, Vice President of Media and Policy for Students for Life Action. We sure appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, up next on EWTN News Nightly, 1,000 blessings. Joyful scenes for the faithful in Iraq. Plus, the first American Pope weighs in on Thanksgiving, and he's not talking about the holiday in November. This week on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Having the Talk, a special course that helps parents guide their daughters through puberty and provides a healthy vision of the feminine cycle and fertility.
Your daughter is actually probably really craving this information and doesn't know where to go to get it. And she probably wants to be able to talk to you about this.
EWTN Pro-Life Weekly will have that story and much more tonight at 6:30 p.m. Pope Leo reminds the faithful that the Eucharist has a place in our daily lives, and we must leave room to experience everything as a thanksgiving.
Solo di essere riconosciuta, colmata e custodita.
At the weekly talk, the Holy Father reflected on how Jesus had arranged everything for his disciples for the Passover and explained that the prepared room reveals the fact that God paves the way for us. The Pope called the faithful to also prepare the Passover by preparing for Mass and communion with him in our daily life. Well, wonderful news out of Iraq as more than 1,000 children have received First Holy Communion. The welcome developments come 11 years after the occupation of villages and towns by ISIS. Since then, Iraq's churches are once again full of believers and joyous occasions. Just look at these images submitted by parishes across the nation of young people receiving the sacrament. One bishop praised the efforts of parents to keep the faith alive with their children. Today, the church celebrates one of the key events in the life of Christ, the Transfiguration. The event is found in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus takes Peter and James up a mountain traditionally believed to be Mount Tabor, and there he transfigures, revealing to them his divine glory, and is joined by Moses and the prophet Elijah. In all three narratives, it happened shortly after Peter's announcement that Christ truly is the Messiah. God the Father also affirms Christ's sonship, telling the disciples, "This is my chosen Son, listen to him." From all of us here at EWTN, we wish you a blessed feast of the Transfiguration. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tara Merchiner. Good night and God bless you.